9 years after the Battle of Yavin, in the soft afterglow of a hard-won peace, a daughter opened her eyes to history, Jaina Solo, child of Han and Leia. She was born not merely into a family, but into a living legend, a crossroads where courage and duty had already carved deep tracks. Basically, she's the Skywalker saga's second wind hope with a pilot's grin. The galaxy carried her name before she could speak it, her cradle already surrounded by whispers of destiny. Leia, at 28, bore the weight of leadership and rebellion, while Han stood at her side with the restless defiance of a smuggler turned hero. Jaina grew in the shadow of her famous uncle, Luke Skywalker, whose quiet resolve after Endor was shaping a new order. The child's laughter became an echo in halls haunted by war, but also a promise that the story was not ending, only shifting. Where once the rebellion fought for survival, now the children of its leaders would inherit both the victory and the scars. And in that fragile space between remembrance and rebirth, Jaina's journey began an ember destined to blaze into the sword of the Jedi. On Yavin 4, under the ruined stones of an ancient Massassi temple, Luke Skywalker rekindled the Jedi flame. There, vines and shadows learned to keep quiet while Jaina and her twin, Jacen, trained. Think of it this way. Her playground was a lightsaber-lit library of lost wisdom. The crumbling steps of that jungle moon became both desk and battlefield, where moss softened the sting of falls and discipline tempered the eagerness of youth. The temple's red moonlight merged with the calm voice of a master uncle, binding their lessons to a rhythm older than empires. Jaina's days were marked by sparring, meditation, and exploration, but also by the unspoken weight of expectation. Every exercise carried the silent reminder of her family's name. Shadows from the past clung to the temple walls, yet so too did the first sparks of a new generation. Where fear might have lurked, courage slowly grew. Where silence might have mocked, wisdom quietly answered. The academy was not just a school, it was a forge. And within its stone embrace, the girl who would become a sword first learned to listen between her heartbeats, where the Force whispered of paths yet untaken. Early years hardened into proving grounds, the lure of the Shadow Academy, Brachus' false tutelage, Tamith Kai's Night Sister cruelties, and the xenophobic Diversity Alliance. Here's the key. Before Jaina ever met a Sith Lord, she learned that darkness often dresses like a teacher or a cause. Every deception forced her to distinguish truth from illusion, compassion from hatred, loyalty from fear. With Jacen at her side, she faced treacheries that sought to fracture not just the Jedi, but the unity of a galaxy still scarred by civil war. The battles of her youth were smaller than the wars to come, yet sharper in the way they carved her identity. She discovered that strength was not in domination, but in restraint. That real power came not from striking, but from knowing when not to. Each adversary honed her like a whetstone. Her victories were less about spectacle than about quiet defiance, about deciding who she would be when fear tried to co-author her story. A sword was being tempered, not yet unsheathed, and every scar she carried was both a lesson and a warning. Destiny would not wait, but neither would it spare her innocence. She loved the hum of starship guts, the language of hyperdrives, and the clean click of calibrated tools. Basically, Jaina's first lightsaber was a hydrospanner. In hangars, warm with fuel and promise, she tuned starfighters and tuned herself, discovering the patience of torque and the honesty of metal. A pilot's hands learned to feel truth through vibration. A mechanic's mind learned that the smallest misalignment could cost a life. Precision became devotion, maintenance, a meditation. Sparks leaping from stripped wires lit her eyes with determination, not fear. The whine of a charged engine was less a machine's call and more a companion's voice, answering the care she had poured into it. In these quiet workshops, where solitude met focus, Jaina built not just ships, but the certainty that skill could steady destiny. What the Force whispered in meditation, the craft confirmed in steel. And when she finally climbed into cockpits, the starfighters obeyed. Not because they were commanded, but because they had been loved into readiness. At 16, she flew like tomorrow, owed her a clear lane. Think of the Lando's Folly asteroid course as a rite Jaina didn't just pass, she set the mark. Veteran pilots, men and women scarred by wars, found themselves grinning in disbelief at her telemetry. Where others saw lethal rock fields, she traced patterns of possibility. What they called risk, she called listening to the hull. What they called luck, she called the Force singing through her hands. The cockpit became her cathedral, and the thrumming engines her choir. She was Han Solo's daughter in blood, but the skies claimed her in spirit, crowning her with a gift sharper than pride clarity. Every roll, every snap turn, every calculated graze past danger stitched her closer to the destiny that awaited. Piloting was not escape, it was revelation. In the echo of cheers and the record she unknowingly set, the galaxy whispered what her family already knew. Jaina Solo was born to fly beyond maps, toward the uncharted frontiers where only the boldest dared to breathe. The Yuuzhan Vong crossed into known space like a storm of unfamiliar pain, flesh-crafted weapons singing hymns of conquest. Here's the key, this war didn't just threaten worlds, it challenged the Force itself. Jaina joined Rogue Squadron, where call signs become epitaphs and friendships become shields. She flew in skies that bled, where each mission's success was measured by who returned, not by medals earned. Her X-Wing became an extension of grief and defiance, its hull scarred with the stories of near falls and impossible escapes. In battles where gravity bent and reality twisted, she learned that victory was never clean. It was survival etched into the marrow. She tasted loss alongside triumph, carrying the names of fallen wingmates like coordinates burned into her soul. Each engagement carved new lines in her spirit, and every star that witnessed her flight carried the silent memory of sacrifice. The Yuuzhan Vong taught her what every Jedi fears to learn. Some wars do not end with light prevailing, they end with warriors transformed into something they never wished to be. And in that crucible, Jaina's edge sharpened, preparing her for the role no one else could carry. On Merkur, a strike team dove into Green Twilight to end the Voxen plague on Jedi. Basically, it's the kind of op where a step feels like a sentence and the jungle edits without mercy. Jaina moved in lockstep with Jacen and Anakin, 3 notes of a single chord, each strike resonating in dangerous harmony. The forest itself seemed alive, its shadows bristling with teeth bred to hunt them. Duty pressed harder than gravity. Every breath was a negotiation between courage and survival. The mission's rhythm was survival. The melody was duty. When the Voxen fell and silence claimed the canopy, the cost was written not in victory chants but in the tremor of exhausted hands. The jungle stillness carried a scream only their hearts could hear. In the quiet aftershock, Jaina learned a brutal truth that even righteous victories can tear seams that love alone cannot mend. The echoes of that twilight would never fade. They would mark her forever. Grief taught her a harsher grammar. Anakin's death turned laughter brittle and forced her heart to relearn its own weight. Think of it this way. The stronger the alloy, the more heat it takes to temper it. She withdrew into distance lined with duty mechanics benches, mission rosters, and cockpit runs flown without conversation. Where once she had been quick to joke or smile, silence became her language. The galaxy kept turning, as galaxies do, but Jaina rotated around a missing star, caught in a gravity she could not escape. The familiar hum of engines no longer comforted. It sounded like absence given form. Yet in that absence, she found a strange endurance, the kind that refused to collapse even under unbearable weight. Pain became honest company, purpose the only map she trusted. The fire that grief lit within her would never burn out. It became the forge where her destiny was reforged, sharper and darker, yet still unbroken. Jagged Fel entered like a vector from the cold, disciplined, relentless, carrying the etiquette of the Chiss ascendancy. Here's the key, he brought a mirror, not a rescue. Against his quiet steel, Jaina measured her own. In him, she found no sympathy, only precision. The kind that acknowledges pain but does not excuse weakness. Missions forced collaboration, and collaboration forced clarity. Their starfighter wings wove trust in the fire of combat. Their debriefings carved respect in words as spare as frost. He taught her the mathematics of discipline, while she showed him the intuition of the Force. In the hush after battle, where adrenaline ebbed and silence grew, she found in Jag not a savior, but a companion who spoke fluent silence. If destiny is a dance, Jag learned her steps, and in turn, she learned that even warriors are allowed to be seen. Their bond was not tender, but it was unshakable. And for Jaina Solo, That was a beginning she had not expected. The Force flowed through her as utility, not ornament telekinesis as steady as breath. The healing trance, a borrowed stillness in chaos. Basically, these weren't party tricks, they were survival tools. In dark cells and battlefields alike, Jaina leaned on quiet disciplines more than grand gestures. Torture tested her, but calm became her counterstrike. Pain could not be erased, but it could be reframed. Wounds could scar, but they could also signal resilience. In recovery, she found agency. In focus, she found repair. The body remembered hurt, but the spirit remembered the way out. She did not ask the Force to protect her, she asked it to lend her the discipline to keep fighting. Every gesture of control, every steady breath, was a vow that she was more than her suffering. What she could not lift, she endured. What she could not endure, she transformed. The Force did not coddle her, it commissioned her, marking her not with ease, but with expectation. With Jacen, she shared the mind-meld, two rivers braided into one current. Choices sinking in the blue flash between thought and movement. Think of it like co-piloting a single soul. In battle, the technique turned confusion into choreography. Enemies finding themselves opposed not by two Jedi, but by one multiplied presence. It felt inevitable, natural, as if their twinship had simply been waiting for translation into tactics. Yet the same bridge that made them unstoppable also made them exposed. When one heart trembled, the other felt the quake. When one faltered, the other staggered. To fight as one was to suffer as one. This gift was edged like a blade. Its promise of strength was shadowed by the risk of collapse. The meld was neither shield nor sword, but both, and Jaina carried its cost as much as its brilliance. Tahiri Vela returned from Yuuzhan Vong, hands braided with another identity, a soul stitched into a conflict it never asked to wear. Here's the key, Jaina doesn't fix people, she helps them remember. Tahiri's personality was fragmented, scarred by experiments that made her believe she was part of the very enemy she once fought. Through patient presence and mind-steeped grace, Jaina pulled at the knots, showing Tahiri the path back to her own name. She did not erase the other voice, nor pretend scars vanish. She simply gave her friends space to reclaim what still belonged to her. It was not a triumph of command, but of consent. Not every thread untied, some wounds remained as stern tutors, reminders of what had been taken. But Jaina learned here a second kind of piloting, guiding someone through night without claiming the dawn as her own. Healing, she realized, was less about power and more about accompaniment, a duet where dignity was the chorus. In the quiet after war, Jaina discovered that peace can be an amplifier. What's unresolved grows louder in the hush. Basically, rest is when the ghosts speak up. She carried Anakin's silence, Jacen's shadow, and the echo of every name Rogue Squadron never brought home. The galaxy expected her to stand tall, but she learned that standing still was the harder test. She wrestled with the loner instinct inherited from Han, the leadership gravity inherited from Leia. Each demanded a different posture. Both required truth. Duty called. Solitude argued. So she built rhythms of survival. The cockpit became sanctuary, the workshop confession. Somewhere between star charts and torque specs, she accepted that balance was not a gift, it was a negotiation renewed every dawn. Even in stillness, she trained, because stillness was never permanent. Peace was simply another battlefield, only quieter. Decades after Yavin, turbulence returned, alliances shifted, governments hardened, and the empire of yesterday wore new uniforms. Think of history as a spiral. What looks like return is often evolution. Jaina stood where veterans always stand, between power and those who will be crushed by it. Her rank mattered less than her reach, and her reach stretched across hangars, war rooms, and the sudden blue of ignited blades. She flew sorties that read like arguments with tyranny, cut through bureaucratic fog, and kept her lightsaber sheathed until conversation starved. When words failed, readiness answered. The galaxy did not need another myth, it needed someone fluent in consequences. She bore the weight not as a Solo, not as a Skywalker, but as the Sword of the Jedi, a title that was not ornament but commission. In her shadow, people survived. In her presence, oppression hesitated. Alema Rar moved through the margins like a grief-made blade, a mirror cracked by war and reshaped by bitterness. Here's the key, Jaina fights enemies, not tragedies, but she knows when they overlap. Hunting a Lema was pursuit and vigil both. Not only chasing a foe, but tracking the fragments of someone who might have been spared in another timeline. Jaina read scars as trackers read rain, what fell, what soaked, what evaporated. Each duel was a dialogue. The survivor who clawed forward at any cost, and the Jedi who measured cost as sacred. When sabers crossed, sparks carried sorrow as much as fury. The hunt ended not with triumph, but with the inevitability of closure. Justice came sharp, but so did grief. Jaina learned that some victories feel like closing a door you once hoped might open onto light, and the sound of that door can echo for years. On Mandalore, Boba Fett taught her the mathematics of unfair fights. Basically, he polished the edges the Jedi won't admit they have. His training was stripped of pretense. No robes, no rituals, only angles, gadgets, and the pragmatics of living through bad odds. He drilled her on how to vanish before a swing landed, how to make a feint the size of a war, and how to turn mercy into precision by ending a fight before it multiplied. For Fett, honor was a myth. Survival was arithmetic. Jaina absorbed his doctrine without surrendering her center. She did not trade ideals for ruthlessness. She apprenticed in survival so her ideals would still have somewhere to stand. What she carried from Mandalore was not a Mandalorian creed, but a sharpened instinct. The knowledge that to save the galaxy, she might one day need to fight like someone who expected no one to save her. Titles choose their bearers in the moments no one wants quiet rooms where the next choice will cost something irreplaceable. Think of Sword of the Jedi as a vow that doesn't wait for ceremony. Luke had spoken it once as prophecy, but Jaina lived it as burden. The name fit like a scabbard, finely filled, a weight that was not decoration but demand. A sword is not a crown, it is responsibility shaped into edge. Jaina accepted that some knots cannot be untangled, only cut, and that the galaxy would need her to wield that decision. She bore the role not as ornament, but as function sharp, swift, merciful when possible, final when required. In an age where tyranny kept rediscovering new disguises, the Jedi needed a blade that remembered mercy and used it first and last. Jaina Solo became that blade, not by wanting it, but by surviving into it. Jacen chose the mask Darth Caedus, a declaration that the quicker path had finally convinced itself it was the only road. Here's the key: villainy often arrives sounding like triage. To Jaina, the mind bridge once shared with her twin became a battlefield, their harmonies curdling into static. The bond that had once turned two souls into choreography now transmitted only betrayal and grief. Love did not vanish, it became less useful. The galaxy did not pause to let her mourn the living. Reports arrived like blades, spelling out what she refused to name. Her brother was not coming back. Every council meeting, every intelligence brief pressed the truth harder. If no one else could stop him, she would have to learn how. The decision was not carved in anger, but in inevitability. To save countless lives, she would face Caedus not as a sister, but as the sword of the Jedi. She returned to Fett not for permission, but for a curriculum that admitted her reality. Basically, to reach a Sith who knows your rhythms, you must step off the beat. The Mandalorian camps became her classroom low-oxygen drills that pressed the lungs into fire, ambush equations calculated in dirt, the etiquette of traps where failure meant bruises or worse. She practiced losing and leaving, bleeding and breathing anyway, learning that retreat could be strategy, not shame. Every sunrise, Fett peeled away another assumption of what a Jedi does, replacing it with what a protector must. She sparred against flamethrowers and nets, dodged blades coated in toxins, and studied how to make mercy fast enough that it did not multiply danger. In the dark between lessons, she held her code like a rosary, not to boast of her faith, but to remind herself why she endured. Survival, she realized, was not compromise. It was the ground on which ideals could still stand. That taught her to fight Jacen by refusing to fight Jacen, the boy, the laugh, the shared secrets. Think of it this way: she trained to meet Caedus, not to kill her childhood. She mapped his tells with surgical patience, countered his feints until instinct could not betray her, rehearsed for both his mercy and his lack of it. Each drill carved distance between memory and mission, turning love into a variable she could neither erase nor depend on. She rehearsed grief until her hand no longer trembled at the thought of raising it against him. Yet every plan, no matter how brutal, left a blank square space reserved for the unpredictable weight of family. Sealing her armor before the final march, Jaina whispered not of vengeance but a possibility. To win clean, if clean was still possible. The promise was fragile, but it was hers to carry. Their initial clashes were compositions of restraint sparks, held in cupped palms, wills colliding under the echo of shared childhoods. Here's the key: she tested the door before breaking the lock. The battlefield was not silent, but strangely intimate. Every strike a confession, every counter a rebuttal. I know you, her blade seemed to say with each parry. That is precisely the problem, Caedus' riposte seemed to answer. Civilians fled, allies hesitated, but Jaina pressed forward into the corridor of no return, where sibling bonds unraveled in the harsh light of necessity. Dialogue failed in increments, shrinking into the language of blows and counters. Mercy hovered like a shadow she could no longer trust. Love became a trap when weaponized against itself. Jaina discovered in that crucible that restraint has its limits, and when compassion is twisted into leverage, the only reply tyranny respects is precision. The sword of the Jedi did not swing for glory, it struck to end what words could no longer save. Command is a room without sleep. Briefings that taste like iron, maps that lie by omission, plans that bleed even when they work. Basically, leadership is grief with spreadsheets. Jaina bore it with the same quiet discipline she once gave to tools and starfighters, balancing a galaxy's demands against the fracture lines of her own heart. Every choice was triage, protect a world, shield a friend, find Jacen, stop Caedus. Each victory left an invoice written in names she would not forget. At night, the cockpit was kinder, the stars judged less than committees. There, silence was not accusation, but balm, and in that hush, she traded unspoken promises with Jagged Fel. Futures, she realized, were not secured by declarations in chambers, but by small loyalties carefully kept under starlight. She stitched alliances with needle and rumor, Mandalorians who respected outcomes, Chiss who respected order, Jedi who respected the long view. Think of coalition as a braid. You don't need unanimity, you need tensile strength. Each ally brought tools, demands, and suspicions. Jaina set boundaries with a duelist's honesty. This far for victory, no farther for soul. Her negotiations were less speeches than sparring matches, words crossing like blades until respect was the only conclusion left standing. Even in disagreement, her allies understood that a sword, if maintained properly, does not cut the hand that guides it, nor the hands it never hopes to harm. The braid held, not because it was flawless, but because she bound it with the rarest commodity in war trust earned by cost, not claimed by title. Before the final hunt, she rehearsed the past until it no longer argued with the present. Here's the key: closure isn't a waypoint on the mission plan. She studied Caedus like a scholar studies an ancient poem. Meter, metaphor, the line breaks were meaning heights. Every memory of Jacen became a contour to anticipate. Every shared laugh another feint to disarm. She built redundancies into her tactics, trained her body to choose precision even under pain, and fed her courage only with truths she could not deny. The team around her knew their marks, and the contingencies had contingencies. But when the doors finally slid open, it was not plans she carried, it was permission. Permission to end what love could not repair. Permission to wield the title Luke had spoken years ago as prophecy. The sword of the Jedi walked into the moment where prophecy met blood. Their blades sparked the color of history, sibling laughter shattered into angles, shared training repurposed into traps. Basically, it was a chess match played inside a thunderstorm. Caedus struck to convert, Jaina struck to conclude. The Force pulled both ways, memory pleading for reprieve, duty demanding resolve. Every step mapped pain, every parry argued theology. Openings appeared like old photographs. Moments where childhood flickered in the tilt of a wrist, the hesitation of a glance. Jaina closed them with a surgeon's mercy. The duel's grammar reduced itself to only two tenses: what must end and who will survive ending it. Sparks rose like prayers, and each strike carried the weight of futures unspoken. In the second between choice and consequence, she became exactly what her title foretold. Think of it this way: she didn't win. She completed a task only she could bear. The strike landed clean, irreversible. The room exhaled as if relieved the galaxy had made up its mind. Somewhere far away, childhood finally let go of her hand. Silence poured into the chamber, heavier than the battle's noise. A silence that carried verdict rather than peace. She stood within it, her breath uneven, her saber dimmed, her eyes refusing triumph. The sword of the Jedi had done its work, and the echo it left behind named her more surely than any metal could. Peace arrived like a nervous guest hovering in doorways, unsure which room it deserved. Basically, endings don't turn into beginnings without paperwork and apologies. Jaina did both. She wrote letters no one had columns for, visited graves with hands that remembered old warmth, and bent over engines with a patience that turned bolts into sacraments. Maintenance became her quiet battlefield, where victory was measured in ships that flew again, in crews that trusted her touch. When reporters pressed for quotes, she offered only accuracy. When friends offered parties, she offered gratitude, then space. The galaxy healed in increments, and she permitted herself to heal in the same way. Not in fanfare, but in fidelity, one careful breath after another. She returned to Fett with thanks measured in results. The training had done what it promised, and she had not paid extra in soul. Here's the key. Pragmatism isn't cynicism, it's strategy with scar tissue. Fett's nod was brief, the kind of acknowledgement that folds 6 conversations into one. He had shown her tools she would not glorify but would not disown. The Mandalorian camps, once a crucible of drills and bruises, now felt less like exile and more like memory filed for later use. In her private journal, written with hands still steady from discipline, she recorded only one sentence. I used what I had to protect who I could. No fanfare, no confession, no wasted ink. It was enough, because it was true. And when she left Mandalore behind, it was not escape, it was graduation into a future only she could carry. With Jag, the future was a sequence problem, variables of duty, loyalty, time zones of responsibility. Think of love here as a flight plan. You keep updating the ETA and never stop checking fuel. Their bond was never naive. It was disciplined affection, as meticulous as starship maintenance. Romance between Guardians was scheduled in pencil, erased by wars, redrawn in stolen hours. When they did meet, silence rested instead of accusing, and the stillness between them felt earned. Each goodbye became less a wound and more a lending, a trust that what was shared could survive absence. In this arithmetic, 2 strong vectors formed a corridor. Destiny could travel safely through it without breaking the ship that carried it. Their love was not dramatic, but it was durable. And in the galaxy Jaina inhabited, durability was the most sacred vow of all. Padawans gathered where Jaina taught, and the room took notes even when she did not speak. Basically, fly straight, cut clean, repair what you can. She taught apprentices that victory without repair is only rehearsal for future wars. She reminded them that mercy has rules, and that following those rules makes a Jedi faster, not slower. She showed them how to love their tools, because tools remember their user, and how to distrust their certainty, because certainty blinds more than doubt. Her curriculum centered on a single thesis. A Jedi does not fear complexity, because conscience is a compass designed for tangled maps. Students left her chambers with no illusions of glory, but with sharper instincts for survival and sharper hearts for truth. In her presence, they understood that the sword of the Jedi was not just an office, it was an education and how to carry weight without letting it cut you apart. Covers of far-off editions painted her with Leia's resolve and Han's eyes. Portraits that seemed to know her better than mirrors. Here's the key: legacy travels not only by records, but by likeness. Artists like Tsuyoshi Nagano captured her not as a stranger, but as the sum of heritage, the jawline of rebellion, the gaze of leadership, the poise that was wholly her own. Fans traced lines of ink and brush and felt the convergence of past and present, recognizing both her parents and someone utterly new. In those images, readers met Jaina not as abstraction, but as pilot, warrior, and daughter. The art did what art always does when it succeeds. It introduced the person to the myth without erasing either. Through every printed cover, she lived a little longer in the imagination, waiting for the next story to ignite. A trilogy promised to her title never arrived. Publishing shutters closed, schedules moved on, and the sword waited on a shelf that remained blank. Think of it like a lightsaber unignited, still real, still ready. Fans debated release calendars, alternate plans, and the weight of what could have been. Hope rehearsed itself endlessly, imagining pages that would never turn. Yet absence sharpened her presence. Jaina lived on, not because the market allowed it, but because memory refused erasure. in hearts that had followed her since Yavin, in shelves that still carried her spine-worn adventures. She persisted. Some stories continue even without new ink. They survive by demand of those unwilling to close the book. The sword of the Jedi did not disappear. It waited, suspended between prophecy and unfinished promise. New timelines rose. Old rivers kept their courses underground. Basically, continuity is a galaxy of its own. Legends and canon diverged, but Jaina did not vanish. She persisted as an alternate star whose light still reached travelers willing to look up. Readers learned to carry two compasses, one for official lanes, one for beloved detours. In this plural map, she became proof that meaning does not need permission. It only needs witnesses. And witnesses kept arriving, ready to hear the quiet hum of a starfighter warming for launch in a hangar that exists because we remember it. Jaina Solo, the sword of the Jedi, endures not as a relic but as resonance, living in the tension between what was written, what was cancelled, and what still might yet return. Her story is not closed, it is kept. Students asked where the line is between necessary roughness and cruelty. Here's the key: intention without discipline is just a feeling. Jaina never answered with philosophy when drills would do. She set them to spar until exhaustion, then made them practice stopping, not just striking. She showed feints that saved lives and tricks she hoped they would never have to use. Every move was measured, every correction sharp, but never cruel. In each exercise, she asked two questions that echoed louder than her voice. What do you protect? What do you become to protect it? The right answers shifted with context, sometimes a shield, sometimes a blade. But the wrong answers always rang hollow, because they ignored context altogether. The Padawans learned the difference at speed, their mistakes corrected in bruises and wisdom. Jaina taught them that control, not fury, is the true inheritance of the Jedi. She returned to the jungle temple where the stones remember laughter. Think of it as a calibration, the soul's annual maintenance. Moss still clung to carvings older than empires, and vines pressed against the places she once trained as a child. She walked corridors where her younger feet had hurried, placed her hand against warm stone, and let the silence read her like a book already familiar. Memories surfaced, friends lost, lessons kept, names whispered by the walls as if the temple itself grieved with her. She ignited a training remote and laughed when it still cheated, the same way it always had. Shadows stretched, red light filtered through leaves, and for a moment the galaxy's wars felt far away. Before leaving, she whispered the same vow she had once made as a girl, to keep the light working, even when the wiring grows old. The ruins answered with stillness, a benediction in quiet stone. Sometimes she wrote to Anakin and never sent the messages. Basically, grief is a long-range transmission with no return channel. She described missions in clip detail, reported sunsets from hangar rooftops, and confessed fears only after she confessed resolve. Her words traveled nowhere, sealed in letters folded into a small box hidden behind a panel in her quarters. In them, she admitted that his absence taught her to patrol the borders of despair and to guard against their expansion. She told him that his memory lived not as a chain but as a compass, showing her where not to drift. The pen did not stutter when she wrote truths too sharp to speak aloud. That sorrow had not made her weaker, only more aware of where the fault lines lay. The letters were not anchors, but wind indicators. They told her which way memory was blowing, and she adjusted her course accordingly. On a world nervous from recent occupation, she led a peacekeeping op that required patience sharper than steel. Here's the key: de-escalation is a form of courage, often misread as hesitation. Jaina stood between grieving citizens and jittery soldiers, absorbing the heat of anger and the tremor of fear without letting either spark into chaos. Her saber stayed silent. Her words were enough. She reminded both sides that fear was not a license and grief was not a weapon. By dusk, weapons cooled. By dawn, relief crews moved in. The night was filled not with blaster fire but with exhausted breathing, and Jaina slept for 2 hours on a crate beside a grounded X-Wing. When she woke, she carried with her a definition of victory, unglamorous but essential. Not conquered ground, but repaired bridges, strong enough to hold the weight of a future. Titles can grow heavy if you let them. Jaina learned to wear sword like pilots wear harnesses, support, not ornament. Think of identity here as gear, maintained, adjusted, never worshipped. For her, the rituals were simple. A hand brushed across the fuselage before flight. A quiet promise whispered inwardly to hurt less than necessary, to protect more than pride. She did not polish her legend. She kept it functional. The galaxy continued its habit of breaking in new places, and she continued her habit of arriving where breakage met responsibility. Every time she drew her saber, it was not to glorify the prophecy spoken by Luke, but to meet the moment in front of her. The fit remained good, not because the world grew lighter, but because she grew stronger inside it. A young Jedi asked what it feels like to be legend and alive at the same time. Basically, it feels like doing the dishes in a museum. Jaina smiled and gave answers plain but unshakable. Read, train, repair, rest. Keep a friend who argues well, and a ship that forgives mistakes. Decide early what you will not trade, and keep receipts. Her words weren't lofty, they were field notes disguised as counsel. Then, as dawn spread pale light across the hangar, she led them into starfighters. The first lesson of the day was not in the archives, but in the horizon itself. Some truths can only be learned in the air, where stars remind you that legends are simply pilots who kept flying long enough to outlast the storm. When the hangar lights dim and even the droids speak softly, Jaina Solo walks the center line between bays and lets the day drain from her. Here's the key: legacy is not applause, it is stewardship. The title Sword of the Jedi was never a crown for parades, but a duty to return to the workshop after every sortie, to patch what was broken, to keep the wiring alive even when the galaxy frayed again. She is the sword, not for the glamour of battle, but for the fidelity of repair afterward. She knows empires return, grief repeats, and hope must be maintained like engines calibrated daily, never assumed. So she keeps her blade sharp, but her conscience sharper, refusing to let the edge corrode into cruelty. And in the hush before the next launch, when the only sound is the steady hum of a ship warming, the galaxy feels, if only for a breath, safe. A sword is a promise kept under pressure. Think of her legacy as an instruction manual disguised as a life. Jaina Solo's path, pilot, healer, hunter, student, teacher, spelled out a doctrine of lucid mercy. Assess clearly, act cleanly, repair relentlessly. She loved precisely, fought reluctantly, and finished what only she could. The Force does not hand out crowns, it hands out responsibilities. She accepted hers without spectacle, and in doing so gave the order what prophecy had whispered: a blade that cuts without wounding the future. To apprentices, she became proof that strength is not measured by how loudly one strikes, but by how carefully one decides when to. Legends endure because they remain useful, and Jaina's use was always this: to meet the galaxy's fractures with steadiness, to turn prophecy into practice, and to remind those who follow that mercy, when discipline is sharper than steel.